Welcome to the debate. Today we are opening an investigation into a problem that I think plagues every thoughtful person eventually. We live in this world of fragmented knowledge. You have physics in one building, psychology in another, mythology sort of tucked away in the basement, and computer science across the street. We treat them as if they're completely different worlds. But my question today is simple, even if the implications are, well, pretty radical. What if they are all describing the exact same underlying architecture, just using different languages?
That is a provocative premise. I mean, usually when people try to merge something like physics and mythology, we end up with something that's neither good science nor good theology. It tends to become this muddy soup of quantum mysticism.
Precisely. And I want to avoid the soup. So I want to introduce a specific tool today. We're going to explore what's called recursive structural isomorphism. It's a mouthful, I admit, but think of it as a kind of universal translator for reality. The question is this: can we detect invariant patterns, a truth structure, that repeats across every single domain, from the way a neuron fires to the way a civilization collapses? Are we looking at a Rosetta Stone for the structure of existence itself?
Okay, and I'm here to play the role of the boundary guard, I suppose. There's a concept in statistics called overfitting, where you find a pattern because you are desperate to see one, not because it's actually there. Seeing faces in clouds doesn't mean the clouds are people. So I want to make sure we aren't just engaging in some kind of high-fidelity pareidolia here. If we're going to claim these connections, they need to be rigorous.
I accept that challenge completely. I'm not arguing for poetry here. I am arguing for what I call systems archaeology. My position is that humanity is suffering from a lost-in-translation crisis. We have these spiritual traditions that have lost their empirical grounding. They've become just stories. And on the other hand, we have hard sciences that have lost their existential meaning. They've become just mechanics. I intend to prove that we can bridge this gap, not by believing in the stories, but by analyzing the topology of the systems themselves.
Then let's look at the map. I'm skeptical, but if you claim to have a coordinate transform between ancient myth and modern systems theory, then I'm ready to scrutinize it. But let's be very clear about our terms. Isomorphism is a specific mathematical concept.
It is.
Right. It implies a one-to-one mapping where structure is preserved. So if set A is isomorphic to set B, they are functionally identical in terms of their relationships, even if the elements themselves look different. A clock face with Roman numerals is isomorphic to a clock face with Arabic numerals. The logic holds. You're claiming we can do that with meaning?
I am. My core thesis is this. Terms we usually relegate to the religious bin, words like gnosis or noesis, they were not originally religious buzzwords. In Hellenistic philosophy, used by Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics, these were technical terms. They were, in effect, describing cognitive science. They were mapping the state space of the human mind, but they were writing it in the only language they had available at the time.
And that is a fair historical point. Noesis essentially meant intellection or direct apprehension. It wasn't necessarily mystical in the way we use the word today. But my concern is that by rereading ancient texts as proto-neuroscience, we risk two things. First, we strip the ancient texts of their cultural context. We're essentially colonizing the past with our modern biases. And second, we mystify hard science. If we start saying neurons are just like angels, we stop doing biology and we start doing fantasy.
I agree, that is the danger of metaphor, but I'm not proposing metaphor. I am proposing we use a structural isomorphism engine. We are going to look at function, not belief. In physics, for example, we accept that a pendulum and a spring mass system are isomorphic. They both follow the exact same differential equation for simple harmonic motion. The material is different. One is string and brass, the other is a steel coil, but the math is the same. I am saying we can do this for the systems of consciousness.
Okay. If we're moving from belief to mechanical function, I'm listening. But the burden of proof is on you to show me that the math actually matches.
Let's test it immediately. I want to run a blind test with you. I am going to describe a functional process, a sequence of operations. I won't tell you the domain. I just want you to tell me what system I'm describing based solely on its architecture.
All right, I'll play. Give me the parameters.
Okay, this is a 5-step operational sequence. Step 1 is stability. The system is operating in a baseline of coherent, integrated operation. Everything works. Step 2 is the control interface. The system generates a model, a simulation, to manage its interactions with the environment. And crucially, the system begins to mistake the simulation for the total reality. It filters out noise to maintain control and efficiency. Step 3 is breakdown. The model encounters a limit, an error signal. The simulation fails to predict an event in the real environment. The control interface cannot process the anomaly. Step 4 is liminal reconfiguration. The system enters this plastic state of instability. The model collapses, entropy spikes. It looks like chaos, but it's actually a search mode for a new configuration. And finally, step 5 is reintegration. The system stabilizes at a higher level of complexity. It has updated its priors and returned to stability, but it is now robust against the error that caused the crash.
Okay, right. I mean, that's a textbook description of a complex adaptive system. If I'm wearing my cybernetics hat, that's the feedback loop of a homeostat. If I'm a neuroscientist, that is predictive processing, or the free energy principle famously described by Carl Friston. The brain predicts the world, that's step 2. It hits a prediction error, step 3, and then it reconfigures the neural connections to minimize surprise, that's 4 and 5. It's how learning happens.
If it's perfectly correct, it's a standard learning algorithm.
It fits, yeah. It's the cycle of adaptation. You build a model, you break it against reality, and you rebuild it better. This is how AI is trained. It's how the scientific method works.
And here is the reveal. That is also the exact narrative arc of Valentinian Gnostic cosmology, a myth system from the 2nd century completely stripped of the spiritual labels. Stability is the pleroma, the fullness, the integrated whole. The control interface that mistakes itself for the world is the demiurge. The breakdown is the fall or the rupture. The liminal reconfiguration is metanoia, which is usually translated as repentance, but it literally means changing your mind or beyond mind. And reintegration is the return to the pleroma. The structure is not just kind of similar, it is isometric.
That is... That's striking. So you are arguing that the Gnostic creation myth, which is usually read as a story about a jealous lesser god trapping souls in matter, you're saying that's actually an allegory for a predictive model failing?
I am arguing that the Gnostics were hitting the same structural wall that modern cyberneticists are hitting. They were attempting to describe the mechanics of how a consciousness, whether it's a human mind or a cosmic mind, encounters error and corrects itself. They just used the vocabulary of myth because they didn't have the vocabulary of algorithms.
Okay, I have to pause on the demiurge mapping, because this is the controversial point. In the texts, the demiurge is a distinct, often malevolent entity. It's the false god. You're equating that with a control interface or a generative model? That seems like a pretty big leap from villain to software function.
But look at the function, not the personality. What does a generative model do? It creates a simplified simulation of the world so the organism can survive. It says, I know what this is, it imposes order. But it is blind to everything outside its parameters. The Gnostics called the demiurge Samael, the blind god. Why? Because it thinks its simulation is the whole universe. It's blind to the pleroma, the greater reality outside of it.
So the evil or the arrogance of the demiurge is actually a description of the limitations of a model?
Exactly. It's the blindness of a local feedback loop that thinks it is the global system. And this is what I mean by systems archaeology. When you read, the demiurge is arrogant, that's emotional language. When you translate it through the isomorphic lens, it means the local model is incapable of processing data outside its training set.
That is a compelling reframe. It turns a theological villain into a functional component. It's necessary for the system to work. I mean, you need a model to interact with the world. You can't just experience raw chaos. But it's dangerous if that model isn't updated.
Precisely. And this gives us a kind of Blinkist-style insight into human psychology. The ego is the demiurge. It's not a demon, it's a manager. It creates a story of me to navigate the world. But when that story encounters trauma or failure, step 3, the breakdown, the ego panics. It tries to tighten control.
All right, let's push this mapping further then. If this is a Rosetta Stone, the other terms have to align as well. You mentioned archons. In Gnosticism, these are the rulers, right? The henchmen who keep humanity trapped in the lower spheres.
Right, so think about regulatory systems in biology or politics. If the demiurge is the central model, the archons are the constraint enforcers. They are the feedback loops that maintain homeostasis. When you try to quit smoking or when a society tries to change a law, what happens? The system fights back to maintain the status quo.
Resistance to change. Huh. Like the immune system attacking a transplant? Or just bureaucratic inertia?
Right. Those are your archons. They aren't demons trying to hurt you. They are regulatory mechanisms trying to preserve the current model's stability. They block the reconfiguration phase because, well, reconfiguration looks like death to the current model.
That actually makes sense of the whole planetary spheres thing you often find in those myths. You have to pass through them to get out. You have to overcome the regulatory limits of your current level of organization to reach a higher one.
Exactly.
System collapse. It is the space where the old model has failed, but the new one hasn't formed yet. When you hit a massive prediction error, say a divorce, a job loss, a paradigm shift in science, the world feels empty, meaning evaporates. That is the kenoma. It feels like a void, but functionally, it is just the state where your interface is offline.
You are making a strong case for the utility here. You're not claiming the Gnostics knew about neurotransmitters or predictive coding. You're claiming they knew about the topology of processing information.
Precisely. They were mapping the state space of consciousness. They identified the checkpoints. They essentially wrote the user manual for the human operating system, but they wrote it in code. Oh, you are in the void? That is the kenoma. Don't panic. That is step 4. Reintegration comes next.
You know, this reminds me of the history of chemistry. Alchemists had all these bizarre symbols, red lions and green dragons, but they were actually describing chemical reactions. When we learned the periodic table, we didn't lose the reaction, we just renamed it.
Yes, that is the coordinate transform. We are moving from the coordinate system of myth to the coordinate system of systems theory. The underlying reality, the territory, hasn't changed, only the map has. And my argument is that by overlaying them, we get a stereoscopic view of the truth.
However, and here is where I must pull the brake again, there is a risk of what I call universalism creep. You've shown a mapping between one specific Gnostic myth and one specific cognitive process, but you are implying something much, much bigger with this idea of recursive structural invariance.
I am. I'm introducing the concept that this structure isn't just in the mind, it's everywhere. It is recursive.
Turtles all the way up.
And all the way down.
But this is where physics usually separates from philosophy. In physics, we have universality classes. We know that a magnet near a critical temperature behaves mathematically identically to a liquid turning into a gas. The details don't matter. The math of the transition is the same. That is established science. But are you suggesting that a human mind, a civilization, and the cosmos itself are all in a same universality class?
That is the hypothesis. And I'd say look at the data. Why do political regimes collapse? They become rigid, that's stability. Then they ignore the needs of the populace, which is a control interface failure. They hit a revolution, which is breakdown or kenoma. And they eventually restructure, reintegration. Why do ecosystems go through succession? Same arc. Why does a star collapse and go supernova to create heavier elements? Breakdown and reintegration.
So you are arguing that crisis or suffering is not a moral failing, but a structural necessity.
It is a requirement for complexity. You cannot move from a simple system to a complex system without passing through the kenoma, the breakdown of the previous order.
If that is true, then the specific content of our beliefs matters less than whether our systems adhere to this structure.
That is the radical implication. This method acts as a truth detector. We don't need to ask, is this story historically true? We ask,
Does this system follow the invariant architecture? For example, look at totalitarian ideologies. They often promise stability and control, steps 1 and 2, forever. They claim they can banish the breakdown. They claim the control interface is perfect.
Right, they promise a 1,000-year reich or a permanent utopia. They claim history has ended.
Exactly. And because they deny the necessity of the breakdown and reconfiguration, they become brittle. They violate the structural laws of reality. A system that doesn't allow for its own konoma is a dead system. It's a demiurge that refuses to die.
That is fascinating. So you're using structural analysis as a litmus test for viability. If a political or personal philosophy doesn't account for the failure mode, it's not a complete system. It's structurally unsound engineering.
Correct. It's an unstable model. The isomorphic lens allows us to see through the surface language. So when we see a spiritual tradition that insists on a perfect, unchanging leader, we can recognize it immediately as a demiurgic error, a local model trying to be the whole. When we see a scientific theory that claims it has solved everything and needs no revision, we see the same error.
You know, this relates to the concept of conceptual compression in information theory. You're taking these vast amounts of cultural and historical data, libraries of myth, theology, history, and compressing them into a single efficient algorithm.
It is conceptual compression. It's a way to organize the library of human knowledge so that the sections aren't separated by concrete walls anymore. You can walk from the religion section to the cybernetics section and realize you are reading the same book.
I will concede this. Looking at it this way does heal that lost in translation problem you started with. If I can look at a mythological text and see a coordinate transform of a systems engineering manual, I don't have to throw the myth away. I can read it for its structural wisdom. I don't have to believe in the literal existence of archons to understand that I have regulatory habits holding me back.
And you don't have to become a mystic to do it. You are simply recognizing that the ancients were technicians of the human experience. They didn't have fMRI machines, but they had thousands of years of introspective data. They built maps. We are just now building the machines that can verify those maps.
But, and here is my final caution, and I think this is crucial for our listeners, we have to remember that the map is not the territory. This structural isomorphism engine is a tool. It is a lens. It is not the truth itself. If we get too obsessed with the pattern, we stop seeing the unique details. A divorce is structurally like a supernova, sure, but it feels very different to the person going through it. The experience matters, not just the math.
I agree completely. It is an interface. But it is an interface that lets us see the invariant topology underneath all the noise. It helps us navigate. When you are in the middle of that divorce, knowing that chaos is step 4 doesn't stop the pain, but it does stop the panic that the pain is pointless.
It brings to mind that old quote about the hidden order. We aren't inventing the truth here. We are detecting the constraints that everything must follow.
Constraints that converge on the same shape. Different civilizations hit the same structural wall, and they solved it with the tools they had. Now we have both tool sets. We have the symbolic richness of the ancients, which gives us meaning and narrative, and the rigorous precision of the moderns, which gives us mechanics and verifiability.
So where does this leave us? If I accept this recursive structural invariance, I'm essentially accepting that understanding itself is a technology.
Yes, understanding is not just memorizing facts. It is recognizing the pattern. It is the ability to see a breakdown in your life or in society and not panic, but recognize it as step 3 in a 5-step invariant process. It frames suffering or system failure not as an end, but as a necessary functional component of reconfiguration.
That is a very stoic and a very scientific way to look at crisis. It removes the drama and replaces it with mechanics. It transforms I am broken into I am reconfiguring.
And it elevates the mechanics to something almost sacred. It shows us that the universe remembers itself. It repeats the same lesson at every scale until we learn it.
The signature of a universe that remembers itself through us. I think that was one of the phrases in the source material. I suppose that is what we are doing here. We are remembering the architecture.
We are. And that is why I call this a tool for revealing truth.
It strips away the belief layer and reveals the load paths of reality.
I think I am ready to summarize my position on this. This structural isomorphism engine is a fascinating tool. I like your term, conceptual compression. It allows us to see connections without losing rigor, provided, and I stress this, provided we treat it as a map. It allows me to respect Gnosis as proto-cognitive science rather than dismissing it as mysticism. It validates the ancient intellect without requiring me to abandon the scientific method.
And for me, the value lies in healing the fracture. The lost in translation crisis is solvable. By recognizing that the spiritual and the scientific are isomorphic transforms of the same state space, we reclaim the structural wisdom of the past. We stop arguing about the alphabet and start reading the blueprint.
We stop fighting over the symbols and start looking at the functions.
Precisely. The goal isn't to declare a winner between ancient and modern. The goal is to learn to see the invariant topology that underpins both.
It seems we have found a way to have our cake and eat it too, rationality and depth together.
Understanding itself is a technology, and I think, after today, the listener holds the blueprints to that technology.
It's up to them to build the engine now.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.